Hello, and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. We are in the wilderness on our way to Mount Sinai, and we're going to pick things up in Exodus chapter 16, verses 13 through 18. I would love to do longer units of text, but it would make the videos really long and unwieldy, and so to keep them about 10 minutes, I'm breaking the chapter up into chunks. So today we're starting in verse 13. In the evening, it happened that the quail came up and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a layer of dew surrounding the camp. But when the layer of dew went up, indeed, on the surface of the desert, thin flakes, a thin hoarfrost upon the land. The Israelites saw it and said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. So Moses said to them, "It is the bread that Yahweh has given to you for food." This is what Yahweh has commanded. Gather enough food for each mouth, an omer per head, according to your number of persons. Each one for those in his tent, you shall take it. The Israelites did so. They gathered, some more, some less. But they measured with the omer, and the one who gathered more did not have extra, and the one who gathered less did not lack. They gathered enough food for each mouth. All right, so they are beginning to see Yahweh's provision for them in the wilderness. If you've read my book, Bearing God's Name, then you know that I've talked about the wilderness as liminal space, where God is reshaping their identity as his people, and they are discovering how to trust him. And one of the ways that God develops their sense of trust in him is by providing the food that they need as they travel. So first they get quail. Now, quail is a seasonal food source in the Sinai Peninsula. Quail migrate north from the continent of Africa up through the Sinai Peninsula and on into Israel. And they go north in the spring and then south in the fall. So this is a very timely provision that God has led his people into the Sinai Peninsula precisely when those migrating quail are coming through. It says that they came up and covered the land, which is the same language that had been used to describe the frogs that came up and covered the land in chapter 8, verse 2, and the locusts that came up and covered the land in chapter 10, verse 5. What a contrast between the judgment and the warning of the signs and wonders in Egypt, and here God's gracious provision for them in the wilderness. Now, I used the word hoarfrost intentionally, but hoarfrost is not necessarily familiar to all of us. So I lived in Alberta, Canada for 4 years, and we had amazing hoarfrost in the winter, which would come and it would coat every blade of grass and every stick on every tree and every object in your yard or on your vehicle with a lacy, kind of flaky coating of frost. Sometimes the needles of frost would be like 3 inches long coming off of, say, an antenna, a car antenna. There would be all these lacy needles coming off depending on which direction the wind was blowing. So manna looks kind of like hoarfrost. It's this lacy flakes of frost, except they're not frost on the ground, and they come in the morning. The word manna in Hebrew, it says they looked at each other and they asked, "What is it?" And the question, "What is it?" in Hebrew is manhu, which sounds a little like manna. Man is an archaic way of saying what. Later it's said as ma. But here it's the more archaic version, and it seems to be related to the Arabic word for this substance that can be found in the Sinai Peninsula. The Arabic word is man, or mann, and it comes from the verb to feed. So there is a substance that the Bedouin tribes in the Sinai Peninsula still eat. It comes from insect secretions. These insects eat the sap or the fruit of the tamarisk tree, and then they excrete a substance that is high in carbohydrates. It's sweet, and it's flaky. It's like an edible wafer, but it disappears in the hot sun, either because it melts or because ants carry it off. So this is a substance that residents of the Sinai Peninsula today still eat. But interestingly, it's only available typically in May, June, and July. So this is the time of year when you would be able to find it. And yet we're told that the Israelites had manna provided for them every day, all year round, until they reach the promised land. So the provision is still miraculous. I'm also wondering if these secretions are coming because of the fruit of tamarisk trees, how much would there actually be? And this is what commentators will say. There's not an abundant enough supply of this to sustain an entire population of people through a whole year of living. So this is still a miraculous provision, even if it's related to the food that can still be found in the Sinai Peninsula. There are not very many trees there. This is a mountainous desert area that's quite bare. I'm actually supposed to be there today climbing Mount Sinai, and instead here I am in my office. So I'll report back when I've seen it with my own eyes, but the pictures I've seen do not have many trees. So we're talking about a miracle here. There is an interesting possible intertextual link between verse 15, when Moses said, "It is the bread that Yahweh has given to you for food," and Genesis 1:29, where God gives them every green plant for food. So it seems like a word play here. He's giving them bread, halechem, the bread, and he's giving it to them, lachem, to eat, le'ochla. So halechem, lachem, le'ochla. So there's three words in a row that sound like each other, and these seem to be echoing Genesis 1:29, where God gives them lachem, and it says lachem twice, green plants, le'ochla, for food. And in both passages we have God giving it. So God has given this and God has given this. So we should be thinking of this as God's creational, generous, hospitable provision in the wilderness. God has provided enough for all of them, with no excess and no surplus allowed. This is interesting because the heads of household are responsible to collect for the whole family. What a flip to what we have seen in Egypt, where the most powerful man is forcing everyone to work to provide for his needs. Here we have God instructing the men who lead each household to go and gather enough for their households. It's an inversion of Egypt's economy. They're supposed to gather an omer per person, and an omer is about 2 quarts of manna, so that's quite a bit to collect. The people gather various amounts, but everyone has enough, so maybe it evens out in each household. The men eat more than the children do, women somewhere in between maybe, and in any case, everyone has enough. Leon Cass says in his book, the biblical omer becomes a unit of satisfaction. Everyone has what they need. And this, of course, reminds us of the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." And by praying, "Give us our daily bread," Jesus is recognizing our communal responsibility to provide for the needs of each other. Justo Gonzalez says in his book, Teach Us to Pray, owning anything that is superfluous for us, but necessary for others, is practically the same as stealing. And therefore, believers who already have the equivalent of their daily bread are expected to share the rest with those who are in greater need. That's, again, from his book, Teach Us to Pray, based on the Lord's Prayer. Give us our daily bread. God is giving his people daily what they need, and it's meant to provide for everyone's need. So if they were allowed to collect surplus and save it up for the future, you would undoubtedly have the most powerful members of the community exploiting those who are needy to collect extra for him to store up, and it would result in a disparity of wealth. But here, God's people are not to be driven by consumerism or by self-aggrandizement, but they're to be living in a sharing community. Back in verse 14, just one more thought to leave you with. It says that when the layer of dew went up, there was on the surface of the desert thin flakes upon the land. And land is an interesting word to use here. Normally, we would expect to see ground. Land isn't usually used for an uninhabited place or an inhospitable place. They're between places of residence. They're here just temporarily. But by calling this land, I wonder if the narrator is highlighting that God is transforming the desert through his gracious provision into a place of abundance, into a place of enough. It's going from inhospitable to hospitable. God is setting the table for his people in the desert. And I love that. So we'll pick it up again next week with the story of what happens when some of them don't follow instructions. But until then, have a great week, and may God continue to provide all that you need.